I cut off contact with my sister 6 years ago and walked away with nothing but a torn backpack. My family called me selfish and told everyone I abandoned them. Last night, my sister searched my name online for the very first time in her life. By midnight, my phone exploded with 60 missed calls. Every voicemail sounded panicked, and they all kept screaming the exact same 3 words. Are you the owner? Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to build your own empire after your family threw you to the wolves. I am Maya, 32 years old and the founder of M Corp. I sat on my Italian leather sofa, swirling a glass of expensive red wine and watching the Atlanta skyline shimmer against the dark window. My phone vibrated against the glass coffee table. It had been vibrating for the last 40 minutes. The screen glowed a harsh red in the dim room, displaying 60 missed calls, all from my older sister, Nia. I finally tapped the screen, putting the latest voicemail on speaker. The absolute panic in her voice was music to my ears. She was hyperventilating, and I could hear the sound of things crashing in the background. Maya, pick up the phone right now. I just searched the CEO of the firm that bought Carter's company. Tell me it is a mistake. Are you the owner? Maya, are you the owner? Answer me, you selfish brat. I tapped delete before she could finish her insult. Selfish. That was always their favorite word for me. I glanced across my spacious penthouse. There, resting on a marble pedestal under a soft spotlight, was a framed glass case. Inside the case was not a piece of fine art, but a cheap, torn navy blue canvas backpack. Sitting right next to it was my newest $100,000 Hermes bag. The contrast was intentional. It was a daily visual reminder of the night my own blood threw me away. Growing up, I was always the workhorse, while Nia was the show pony. Our mother, Estelle, made sure everyone in our neighborhood knew Nia was destined for greatness. Nia got the expensive hair salon trips, the designer prom dresses, and the endless excuses when she failed her classes. I got the chores, the hand-me-down clothes, and the constant lectures about how I needed to work twice as hard just to be considered average. I was expected to be the strong black woman who carried everyone else's burdens. When Nia met Carter, a man whose family owned a mid-sized real estate brokerage, my mother acted like we had won the lottery. She practically worshipped Carter because of his skin color and his supposed old money status. She bent over backward to accommodate him, serving him on fine china, while expecting me to wash his dishes. 6 years ago, when I was 26, my mother and my sister stood in the doorway of our family home and watched me pack that exact blue backpack. Nia had just married Carter. To keep up appearances and fund a lavish wedding she could absolutely not afford, Nia had stolen my identity. She forged my signature and took out $50,000 in secret loans. When the debt collector started calling me and ruining my credit, I confronted her in the living room of the house my grandmother had worked her entire life to buy. The house that was supposed to be our safe haven. Instead of apologizing or being horrified by her own crime, Nia cried to our mother. And my mother, who had always treated Nia like the golden child of the family, looked me dead in the eye and told me to take the fall. She said Carter's wealthy family would leave Nia if they found out she was actually broke and in debt. Take the debt, Maya, she had said, her voice completely devoid of warmth. You are single. You have no prospects. Nia has a chance to secure our family's future with Carter. If you ruin her credit and Carter leaves her, I will never forgive you. Be useful for once in your life. When I refused to ruin my own life for my sister's lies, my mother pointed to the door. She told me I was a disgrace to our community. She called me a jealous hater who could not stand to see her sister marry into a good white family. She told me I was no longer her daughter. When she told me to leave, she did not just close the door. She locked it while I was still standing on the porch. I remember the sound of the deadbolt sliding into place. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It sounded like the end of my world. But in reality, it was the starting gun. I walked out into the humid Georgia night, carrying only the clothes on my back and my laptop inside that cheap canvas backpack. I spent the next 2 years living in a roach-infested apartment on the south side. I worked as a data analyst by day, a bartender by night, and a freelance coder on the weekends. Every spare dollar went to paying off the $50,000 Nia had stolen just so I could clear my name and rebuild my credit score. It was a humiliating, exhausting existence. But every time I felt like giving up, I remembered the smug look on Carter's face and the cold indifference in my mother's eyes. Anger is a phenomenal fuel if you know how to channel it. I did not cry. I did not beg. I went to work. I clawed my way into the brutal world of corporate finance. I pitched to investors who laughed in my face because I was a young black woman with no Ivy League pedigree. But I was hungrier than all of them combined. I found distressed assets, turned them around, and multiplied my capital. Over 6 years, my small consulting hustle morphed into M Corp, a private equity firm that bought out failing businesses and stripped them down. And ironically, the real estate market became my specialty. I kept a close eye on Carter's family brokerage. They were completely incompetent. They bought overpriced commercial lots and took out massive loans to maintain their country club lifestyle. They were drowning in debt, just wearing nicer suits while doing it. So when the opportunity came to buy the firm holding Carter's massive commercial loans, I did not hesitate. I swooped in through a shell company. I bought the paper. I owned their debt. I owned them. My phone buzzed again. Call number 61. I took a slow sip of my wine, savoring the rich flavor on my tongue. Let her panic. Let her sweat. For 6 years, they lived in their delusion, thinking I was some struggling failure who regretfully abandoned her loving family. They never bothered to check on me. They never searched my name until their own survival depended on it. Suddenly, the sleek security intercom mounted on my wall lit up with a soft blue glow. A gentle chime echoed through the quiet penthouse, cutting through the jazz music playing softly from the hidden speakers. It was the front desk of my residential building. The lobby of my building was not a place for tantrums. It was a fortress of discretion designed for executives, athletes, and the ultra-wealthy. For a disturbance to happen down there meant someone had completely lost their mind. I pressed the silver button, letting the audio feed into the room. The voice of Marcus, the night concierge, filled the space. He sounded highly stressed, but was trying his best to maintain his professional tone. Miss Maya, I am so sorry to disturb you at this hour. There is a couple down here in the lobby demanding to see you. They are causing quite a scene. The woman says she is your sister, and the white gentleman with her is threatening to have me fired if I do not let them up the private elevator right now. Before I could even respond, I heard the muffled sounds of a scuffle through the intercom. Carter was yelling in the background, his arrogant voice bouncing off the imported marble walls of the lobby downstairs. I reached out and tapped the speaker button, turning the volume all the way up. I wanted to hear every single word. "Get her down here right now!" Carter screamed, his voice cracking with sheer rage. "You work for us. You are a glorified door boy. Call that little bitch on the phone and tell her to get her boss on the line. She thinks she can play games with my family. She thinks she can ignore our calls. Please, Carter, calm down," Nia begged in the background. Her voice was shrill and panicky, completely stripped of the confident, snobby tone she usually carried. "We are going to get arrested if you keep yelling. Just let the man call her." "I am not calming down," Carter roared. "Do you have any idea what is happening right now, Naya? My family is losing everything. The brokerage is gone. The accounts are frozen. And your sister is sitting up there screening our calls like she is somebody important. I am going to break the security glass if he does not open the gate." I stood perfectly still in my living room, listening to the absolute meltdown happening 30 floors below me. A cold, genuine smile spread across my face. 6 years of absolute silence. 6 years of them pretending I was dead. And this was how they chose to reunite. Demanding, entitled, and entirely unaware of the predator's den they were trying to break into. They still thought I was the helpless 26-year-old girl they could bully and manipulate. They still thought Carter's last name gave him the right to walk into any building in Atlanta and scream at the staff. "Marcus," I said, my voice perfectly smooth and steady. "Do not call security just yet. I do not want them thrown out." "Are you sure?" Ms. Maya, Marcus asked, sounding relieved but confused. "They are highly aggressive and making a lot of threats." I am absolutely sure, I replied, taking another sip of my wine. Scan them through the security gate and put them in the private elevator. Send them up. But keep your security team on standby in the hallway, just in case they forget their manners on the way to the penthouse. Yes, ma'am, Marcus said. The intercom clicked off, leaving the room in silence once again. The war had officially begun. I set my phone face down on the glass table, finally silencing the endless stream of incoming calls from my sister. I walked away from the window and headed toward the massive marble kitchen island in the center of the room. I needed to prepare for my guests. Down in the lobby, the heavy security gates clicked open. I could imagine the smug look on Carter's face as he pushed past Marcus, adjusting the collar of his expensive suit, thinking his cheap intimidation tactics had worked. I could picture Naya rushing in after him, her designer heels clicking frantically against the polished floor. They stepped into the sleek metal and glass box of the private elevator. The doors closed, sealing them inside. Floor 1. The elevator began its ascent. I walked over to the smart home panel on the wall and dimmed the overhead lights by 20%. I let the dramatic glow of the city skyline dominate the room. I wanted the atmosphere to be intimidating. I wanted them to feel the crushing weight of my success the moment they stepped out of that box. Floor 5. I picked up the heavy crystal wine decanter from the counter. The glass was cold and solid in my hand. Down in the elevator, Carter was pacing back and forth in the confined space. His face was a dark, ugly shade of red. He was sweating, his chest heaving as he muttered curses under his breath. He was a man whose entire identity was built on generational wealth and white privilege. A man who had never faced a real consequence in his life. And now that foundation was crumbling beneath his feet. Floor 10. I slowly tilted the decanter. The dark red liquid cascaded into my glass with a smooth, steady rhythm. It sounded like a ticking clock marking the end of their era. In the elevator, Nia was backed into a corner. She was chewing violently on her manicured thumbnail, ruining her expensive polish. She was clutching a crumpled stack of legal papers to her chest. It was the notice of immediate default and foreclosure delivered by courier to their mansion just hours ago. The papers that proved they were officially broke. She kept staring at the floor indicator, watching the numbers climb higher and higher, her breathing shallow and erratic. Floor 15. I set the decanter down with a soft thud. I smoothed the fabric of my silk lounge set. I made sure my posture was perfect. I was not going to give them a single inch of weakness. Meanwhile, Carter hit the metal wall of the elevator with the flat of his hand. He was trying to figure out a narrative. He was trying to convince himself that this was all a mistake. He probably thought I was just a low-level administrative assistant at M-Corp. He probably thought I had accidentally triggered the foreclosure, or that I could simply log into a computer and erase his massive debt. His arrogance completely blinded him to the truth. Floor 20. The city lights of Atlanta stretched out endlessly beyond my floor-to-ceiling windows, painting the room in a soft, golden glow. The penthouse was immaculate. Expensive modern art hung on the walls. The air smelled of expensive sandalwood and undeniable success. In the harsh fluorescent light of the elevator, Naya and Carter looked exactly like what they were. Desperate frauds. The expensive clothes could not hide the blind panic in their eyes. The designer bags could not cover up the fact that they had zero leverage and zero power. They were riding up to my domain on my terms to beg for their financial lives. Floor 25. I walked over to the marble pedestal standing right next to the framed glass case. I looked at my torn navy blue canvas backpack. The zippers were broken. The fabric was stained. It was in the exact condition it was in when I carried it out into the rain 6 years ago. I placed my fresh glass of wine on the pedestal right next to the backpack. I stood tall, crossing my arms over my chest. I focused my eyes entirely on the heavy steel elevator doors at the far end of the hallway. Floor 28. Carter stopped pacing. He stood at the front of the elevator, fixing his tie, trying to look intimidating. He was preparing his opening line. He was getting ready to scream at me, to degrade me, to remind me that I was nothing compared to his family. He was ready to demand to speak to my boss. Floor 30. The elevator came to a smooth, silent halt. The soft, mechanical hum died away. For a split second, there was absolute silence. I took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill my lungs. I was no longer the frightened girl they threw away. I was the executioner of their financial ruin. A soft electronic chime echoed through the room. The heavy steel doors of the private elevator began to slide open. Carter stormed out of the elevator before the doors had even fully parted. He did not pause to take in the breathtaking view of the city or the museum-quality art on the walls. He was a man consumed by his own panic, blind to everything except the raging fire of his ruined ego. He marched straight across the imported Persian rug, his heavy leather shoes thudding aggressively against the floor. Nia trailed a few steps behind him. Unlike her husband, she did notice the penthouse. I saw her eyes dart around the room, taking in the vaulted ceilings, the custom furniture, and the sheer undeniable wealth of my home. For a brief second, a flash of pure envy contorted her face before she quickly masked it with a look of practiced distress. Carter did not offer a greeting. He did not ask how I had been for the last 6 years. He simply marched up to my glass coffee table and slammed a thick, crumpled stack of legal documents onto its pristine surface. The loud smack echoed through the quiet room, briefly interrupting the soft jazz music playing from the hidden speakers. "I do not know whose bed you are warming to live in a place like this," Carter snarled, his chest heaving as he pointed a shaking finger at the papers. "And frankly, I do not care. But whoever your little sugar daddy is, his company is trying to bankrupt my family." I looked down at the documents. It was the notice of immediate default and foreclosure issued by M Corp earlier that afternoon. The paperwork was flawless. I knew it was flawless because I had personally drafted and signed it. I looked back up at Carter, my expression completely blank. I did not speak. I just took another slow sip of my wine. My silence infuriated him even more. He was used to women shrinking when he raised his voice. He expected me to cower, to apologize, to scramble to explain myself. When I did nothing, he stepped closer, invading my personal space, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "Are you deaf, Maya?" he shouted, a vein popping in his forehead. "Your company M Corp just bought out all the commercial debt for my family's brokerage. They issued a demand for immediate payment in full by tomorrow morning, or they are seizing all our assets. Every building, every account, even our personal estate. You are going to fix this right now." I tilted my head slightly, studying him like a fascinating insect trapped under a microscope. "Fix it how exactly?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper but laced with ice. Carter sneered, looking me up and down with absolute disgust. He saw a black woman in a luxury penthouse, and his prejudiced mind immediately jumped to the most degrading conclusion possible. "You are going to march into your office tomorrow morning," he demanded, his voice dripping with venom. "And you are going to use whatever dirty tricks or body parts you used to get this job in the first place to make the CEO of M Corp cancel this foreclosure. You will get on your knees and beg your boss if you have to. You owe my family. We gave you a connection to high society, and this is how you repay us." The sheer audacity of his words hung in the air. If there were a camera circling us at this exact moment, capturing a continuous tracking shot, it would record a masterpiece of contrasting energies. The lens would glide smoothly around the room, capturing Carter's frantic, sweaty desperation as he paced like a caged animal. It would pan over to Nia, hovering nervously near the edge of the light, her hands trembling as she clutched her designer purse. And then the camera would complete its circle, landing on me, standing dead center in the room, absolutely motionless, the calm eye of their pathetic hurricane. I was an untouchable monolith while they spun out of control. Before I could verbally dissect Carter for his disgusting comment, Nia stepped forward. She realized Carter's aggressive approach was not making me flinch, so she decided to deploy her favorite weapon: emotional manipulation. She let out a loud, dramatic sob, covering her face with her hands. When she pulled them away, there were no actual tears, but her face was scrunched up in an Oscar-worthy display of agony. "Maya, please!" Nia cried, her voice cracking perfectly on cue. "You have to help us. Do not listen to Carter. He is just stressed because his family is losing everything. We are family, Maya. You cannot let your boss do this to us. She reached out and tried to grab my arm, but I smoothly stepped back out of her reach. Nia let her hand drop but kept pushing her narrative. You have to do this for me, she pleaded, stepping closer again. We are Black women, Maya. Do you know how hard it is for us out there? We should be on our hands and knees thanking God that we were taken in by an elite white family like Carter's. They gave us status. They gave us a name that means something in this city. If they lose their money, they will blame me. They will throw me out. Do this for the family, Maya. Protect our position. I stared at my older sister, feeling a wave of genuine nausea wash over me. I had always known Nia was vain and selfish, but hearing her speak out loud, hearing the depth of her internalized inferiority was repulsive. She genuinely believed that her only worth in this world came from the validation of a mediocre white man and his financially ruined family. She had sold her soul, her dignity, and my credit score just to buy a seat at a table that was currently collapsing under the weight of its own debt. You want me to protect your position? I asked, my tone dangerously soft. Yes. Nia nodded eagerly, completely missing the threat in my voice. Just talk to your boss, Maya. You clearly have influence here. Whoever is paying for this penthouse will listen to you. Just get the CEO to rip up that foreclosure notice. We will even invite you to our anniversary dinner on Sunday. Mom will be so proud of you for finally being a team player. She dangled our mother's approval like it was a grand prize. 6 years ago, I would have broken my back for that approval. I would have sacrificed my own happiness just to hear my mother say she was proud of me. But that girl was dead. She died the night she was locked out in the rain with nothing but a canvas backpack. The woman standing before them now did not need their approval. She owned their debt. I looked down at the foreclosure notice resting on the glass table. Then I looked at Carter, who was crossing his arms, trying to look dominant despite the visible sweat stains forming under the arms of his suit. Finally, I looked back at Nia, who was watching me with wide, expectant eyes, waiting for me to bow my head and obey just like I always did when we were children. The air in the penthouse grew heavy. The jazz music faded into the background. It was time to shatter their delusion. It was time to introduce them to the real world. I walked slowly around the glass coffee table, closing the physical distance between us. I did not look at my sister. I kept my eyes entirely locked on Carter. You think I owe your family, I said, my voice slicing through the heavy silence of the room. You think you rescued my sister from poverty and gave her a respectable name. You stand in my home and demand my gratitude because you believe you brought wealth to our bloodline. But tell me, Carter, do you even know why I was kicked out of my own home 6 years ago? Nia let out a sharp gasp. The fake tears instantly vanished from her eyes, replaced by sheer, unfiltered panic. Maya, do not do this, she pleaded, her voice trembling. She took a step toward me, holding her hands up as if she could physically push the words back into my mouth. This has nothing to do with the business, Maya. Please keep this between us. Oh, but it has everything to do with the business, I replied, my gaze never leaving Carter's confused face. Because your entire marriage, Carter, is built on the exact same foundation as your failing real estate firm. Absolute fraud. Carter frowned, his thick eyebrows drawing together. What the hell are you talking about? He demanded, crossing his arms tightly over his chest. But I could see the slight shift in his posture. The arrogant certainty was beginning to slip. I took another step closer to him. 6 years ago, when you two were planning your lavish country club wedding, my sister realized she had a major problem. She desperately wanted to play the part of a wealthy socialite for your snobby parents. She wanted to prove she was good enough for your old money family. But she worked as a part-time receptionist at a dental clinic. She did not have a dime to her name, so she stole my social security number. She forged my signature on multiple financial documents. She took out $50,000 in secret personal loans. Nia let out a pathetic whimpering sound and covered her face with her hands, but I did not stop. I wanted Carter to hear every single detail. I wanted him to taste the lie he had been sleeping next to for over half a decade. That custom Vera Wang gown she wore down the aisle, I continued my words, hitting him like physical blows. The imported silk flowers covering the reception hall, the luxury honeymoon suite in Bora Bora, the designer bags she paraded around your mother's country club. All of it was paid for with my stolen identity. She bought her way into your family using my credit score. Carter froze completely. The angry red flush drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and sickly in the dim lighting of the penthouse. He slowly turned his head to look at his wife. His arms uncrossed and dropped to his sides. For a man who prided himself on his superiority, finding out he was the victim of a cheap con was a devastating blow to his ego. Nia was trembling violently. She could not meet his eyes. "Carter, tell her she is lying," she whispered, but her voice lacked any conviction. It was a weak, pathetic attempt to deny the undeniable. "I am the CEO of a private equity firm." "Carter," I said calmly, "do you really think I would make a claim like this without the paper trail to back it up? I have every bank statement, every forged signature, and every collection notice safely stored away. I spent 2 years eating instant noodles and working 3 jobs just to pay off the debt she racked up so I would not go to federal prison for her crimes. When the collection agencies started calling my phone, I confronted her in our family living room. And do you know what our mother did?" Carter did not answer. He was staring at Nia as if he was looking at a complete stranger. "Our mother looked me dead in the eye and told me to take the fall," I said, letting the raw truth fill the room. "She said if your wealthy family found out Nia was actually broke and drowning in debt, you would call off the wedding. Estelle protected her golden child. She told me I was a jealous failure, ruining my sister's big chance. Then she threw me out onto the street and locked the door behind me just so Nia could keep playing dress-up in your privileged world." The silence that followed was deafening. The illusion of the perfect, wealthy, equal partner Carter thought he had married shattered into a million unfixable pieces right there on my Persian rug. He realized in that exact moment that his wife brought absolutely nothing to the table. No wealth, no status, no integrity, just lies and stolen money. "Carter, baby," Nia cried, reaching out to grab his arm. Her manicured fingers dug into the fabric of his expensive suit. "It was a long time ago. I did it because I loved you. I wanted to be perfect for your parents. I did not want them to look down on me. I paid it off, I swear." "You did not pay a single cent of it," I interrupted coldly. "I paid for your wedding. I paid for your lifestyle, and now I own your husband's entire company." Carter ripped his arm away from Nia's grasp with such violent force that she stumbled backward, almost tripping over her own designer heels. "Do not touch me," he hissed, his voice vibrating with disgust. He looked at her with pure, unfiltered contempt. The first major crack in their toxic alliance had just split wide open. Carter was a man drowning in corporate debt, and now he realized the life raft he thought he was holding on to was actually an anchor pulling him deeper into the abyss. He was humiliated. He had marched into my penthouse demanding that I use my body to save his family, completely unaware that I was the one who had financed his fake reality in the first place. "You lied to me," he said to Nia, his breathing heavy. "You let my mother treat you like an equal. You sat at our dinner table acting like you came from money while your sister was paying off your wedding dress. You absolute parasite." Nia began to sob uncontrollably, real tears this time. She looked desperately around the luxurious room, searching for a way out, a way to rewind time, but there was nowhere to hide. The truth had cornered her. I stood motionless, watching the fire I had just ignited burn through their marriage. I did not feel an ounce of pity. They had come into my home to demand my submission, to put me back in my place. But they had fundamentally misunderstood the rules of engagement. I was not a victim seeking an apology. I was the architect of their consequence, and I was just getting started. Carter took a deep, shaky breath. He ran his hands over his face and then smoothed down the lapels of his wrinkled suit jacket. His fragile ego simply could not process the reality of what had just happened. He was a white man born into generations of wealth and privilege. He had been taught from birth that he was the apex predator of the corporate world. To admit that he had been completely outplayed, outsmarted, and cornered by the very black woman he had spent years despising and underestimating was a psychological impossibility for him. His brain could not accept the truth, so it did what it had always done when faced with accountability. It created a delusion. He turned away from his sobbing wife and locked his eyes on me. If you placed a camera on the floor right then, pointing at a low angle tilting up at Carter, you would see a man desperately trying to project towering superiority. He squared his shoulders, lifting his chin to literally look down his nose at me. The arrogant smirk that had vanished a few moments ago slowly crept back onto his face. It was the desperate bravado of a man who was already dead, but refused to lie down. "You really think you have won something here, Maya?" he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You think you are some kind of corporate genius because you got your hands on a few accounting files. Let me tell you exactly what you are. You are a lucky diversity hire." I stood completely still, letting his pathetic insult hang in the air. "You are an affirmative action token for a company trying to look progressive." Carter continued, taking a step toward me as if trying to physically intimidate me. "I do not care what fancy executive title they gave you to hit their minority quota for the quarter. You do not have the brains or the pedigree to run a multi-million-dollar corporate buyout. I have an MBA from Duke University. You have a basic degree from a state school. Somebody else is pulling the strings at M Corp, and you are just the angry little attack dog they sent to bark at us. You are a figurehead, Maya. Nothing more." Nia stopped crying for a second, looking up at her husband. Even she seemed shocked by the blatant disrespect pouring out of his mouth, but Carter was too far gone to care. He was clinging to his racism and his classism like a life raft. "My family has been developing Atlanta real estate since before you were even born," he boasted, his voice growing louder and more aggressive. "We have federal judges on speed dial. We play golf with the city council members. We dine with the governor. Do you really think you can just swoop in with a shady shell company and steal our legacy? My lawyers are going to tear your little firm apart piece by piece." He pointed his finger directly at my face. "I am going to sue M Corp for predatory lending, market manipulation, and corporate espionage. I am going to have my legal team bury your real boss in so much paperwork they will beg to settle. And when they realize you are the one who provoked my family, they are going to fire you. By the time I am done with you, Maya, you will be back on the street carrying that same dirty blue backpack. You messed with the wrong family." Carter let out a sharp breath, feeling incredibly satisfied with his own speech. He truly believed he had just put me back in my place. He thought his empty threats and his family name were enough to make me fold. I did not blink. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. The camera angle in this hypothetical movie would instantly snap to a high-angle shot, looking sharply down at Carter, minimizing him to the size of an insignificant bug standing on my floor. "Are you quite finished?" I asked softly. Carter narrowed his eyes, his confident smirk faltering just a fraction. "You are going to sue me with what money, Carter?" I asked, taking a slow, deliberate step toward him. "Your corporate accounts are frozen. Your personal credit lines are completely maxed out. Your family name is currently a punchline in every major financial institution in this city. You do not have high-powered lawyers on speed dial anymore because you have not paid their retainer fees in 6 months. I know this for a fact because I personally read your accounts payable ledger before I authorized the buyout of your debt." Carter opened his mouth to speak, but I did not let him. I took another step forward, forcing him to hold his ground. His eyes darted nervously around the room, looking for an escape route that did not exist. "Do not stand in my home and talk to me about legacy," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "Your grandfather was a brilliant businessman. He built a real estate empire from the ground up. Your father was a competent manager who kept that empire steady. But you, Carter, you are a colossal failure." The color drained from his face entirely. "You took a thriving commercial brokerage and ran it straight into the ground." I continued, dissecting his failures with surgical precision. "You bought overpriced commercial lots at the absolute peak of the market using high-interest variable loans because you wanted to look like a visionary. Instead of paying down the principal, you used the company accounts as your personal piggy bank. You funded your country club memberships, your luxury sports cars, and your wife's fake high society life with money that belonged to the bank. You bankrupted a 50-year-old family company in less than 5 years just to maintain the illusion that you were wealthy. That is a lie, Carter stammered, taking a half step backward. The market shifted. The interest rates spiked. It was an unpredictable economic downturn. It was gross incompetence, I fired back, cutting through his pathetic excuses. You have an MBA from Duke and you do not even understand the basics of risk management. You thought your white privilege and your grandfather's last name would magically protect you from math. Well, the math caught up with you, Carter. The numbers do not care where you went to school. Carter swallowed hard. The vein in his neck was visibly throbbing. His chest was rising and falling rapidly. I had stripped away every single excuse he had manufactured in his head. I had held up a mirror to his absolute mediocrity and forced him to look at it. You threatened to sue M Corp for market manipulation, I said, stepping so close to him that he had to look down to meet my eyes. I challenge you to try. Call your lawyers right now. Tell them you want to launch a federal lawsuit against a private equity firm that legally purchased your defaulted debt on the open market. Tell them you want to open your company's fraudulent books in a public courtroom for a judge to see. Please, Carter, make that call. Because the moment you do, I will hand over the financial audit that proves you committed corporate embezzlement to fund your personal lifestyle. Carter's jaw clamped shut. His hands balled into tight fists at his sides, but he was completely paralyzed. He knew I was right. If he tried to fight the foreclosure in court, his financial crimes would become public record. He would not just lose his company. He would go to federal prison. I am not a diversity hire, Carter, I whispered, leaning in slightly. I am the predator that has been watching you bleed in the water for the last 3 years. I am the owner of M Corp. I am the CEO. I am the one pulling the strings. And as of this afternoon, I own everything your grandfather built. Carter looked like he had been struck by lightning. His mouth hung slightly open, but no sound came out. The arrogant, entitled white man who had stormed into my penthouse demanding my submission was gone. In his place stood a broken, terrified little boy who had just realized his entire life was over. The silence in the penthouse was so absolute that you could hear the faint hum of the city traffic 30 floors below us. I let that heavy, suffocating silence stretch. I let Carter marinate in his own sheer terror. I watched his mind frantically search for a loophole, a way out, an excuse that could save him from the financial guillotine I had just dropped on his neck. But there was nothing. And then I laughed. It was not a loud or hysterical laugh. It was a dark, quiet chuckle that bubbled up from the depths of my chest, echoing the years of humiliation I had endured at his hands. I turned away from his pale, sweating face and walked over to my marble kitchen island. I picked up my sleek silver iPad, unlocked the screen, and walked calmly back to the glass coffee table. I tossed the tablet onto the glass. It slid smoothly across the surface, stopping exactly inches from Carter's trembling hands. "Pick it up," I commanded, my voice carrying the absolute authority of a judge handing down a sentence. Carter hesitated. He looked at the iPad as if it were a live explosive device waiting to detonate. Slowly, with hands that shook so violently he could barely extend his fingers, he reached down and picked it up. His eyes locked onto the glowing screen. I watched his pupils dilate in horror. I watched the last remaining drop of blood drain from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost in a custom-tailored suit. All of the arrogant swagger of a man who believed his race and his family wealth made him invincible had vanished completely. On that screen was a beautifully organized, brightly color-coded spreadsheet. It detailed every single wire transfer he had made over the last 18 months. But these were not standard corporate expenses. These were massive sums of money being funneled directly from his brokerage escrow accounts into a series of untraceable shell companies in the Cayman Islands. He had been disguising the theft as consulting fees. "Sue me, Carter," I whispered, stepping so close to him I could smell the stale alcohol sweating out of his pores. "Please call your high-powered legal team right now. Let us see how much the Federal Bureau of Investigation loves your money laundering books." Let us see what a federal judge has to say when they realize you have been stealing client deposits to hide your personal assets before your family company inevitably went bankrupt. Carter's mouth opened and closed like a dying fish pulling for air. He tried to formulate a sentence. He tried to issue a denial, but the evidence was staring him right in the face. It was undeniably his own fraudulent accounting. He had committed a massive federal crime, and I had the entire digital paper trail sitting on a secure server he could never touch. If I made one simple phone call to the authorities, he would not just lose his country club membership and his fancy cars. He would lose his freedom for the next 20 years. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. "Get out of my house," I said, my voice cracking through the air like a whip. The command broke his paralysis. Carter dropped the iPad back onto the glass table as if the metal casing had physically burned his skin. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet in his desperation to get away from me. He did not look angry anymore. He looked hunted. He grabbed Nia by the elbow, his fingers digging into her arm with desperate bruising force. "We are leaving," he rasped, his voice barely recognizable as human. "We have to go right now, Nia. Move." Nia stumbled as Carter dragged her toward the private elevator. She looked completely disoriented. The brutal reality of her situation was finally crashing down on her carefully constructed fantasy world. The wealthy, successful husband she had stolen my identity to secure was a massive fraud. The lavish lifestyle she had lorded over me for 6 years was evaporating into thin air before her very eyes. She was about to be the broke wife of a convicted felon with absolutely nothing to her name but a closet full of designer clothes she could no longer afford. But instead of feeling remorse or humility, Nia felt pure venomous resentment. It was always easier for her to blame me than to take accountability for her own disastrous choices. She dug her designer heels into the plush Persian rug, stopping Carter just as the heavy steel doors of the elevator began to slide open. She yanked her arm out of his grasp and turned to face me. Her expensive makeup was smeared with fake tears, and her eyes were wild with the cornered rage of a desperate animal. "You think you have won, Maya?" She sneered, her voice vibrating with pure malice. "You think because you sit up here in this giant glass tower with your dirty money and your fancy executive title that you can just destroy your own flesh and blood without consequences? You are a monster. You always were a jealous, hateful little monster." I stood completely still, letting her empty, pathetic words wash over me without absorbing a single drop of their poison. "I am simply holding up a mirror, Nia," I replied, my tone perfectly even. "Do not blame me just because you hate the ugly reflection staring back at you." "Mom is going to hear about this," Nia threatened, jabbing a manicured finger in my direction. "You know exactly how she gets. She is not going to let you do this to us. She is going to rally the entire family against you. You will be a total pariah. She will destroy you for this, Maya. She will make you regret the day you were born." I tilted my head slightly and let a slow, genuine smirk spread across my face. Nia was still playing by the old rules. She still thought our mother was the ultimate authority figure, the final boss who could punish me into submission. She thought a guilt trip from Estelle would make me drop the foreclosure and hand over my empire. She did not realize that I had already anticipated our mother's involvement. In fact, I was counting on it. I wanted all of them on the battlefield. "Tell her," I said, my tone perfectly light and unbothered. "Tell Estelle everything. Tell her to bring her absolute worst. I will be waiting right here." Carter grabbed Nia by the shoulder and physically shoved her into the elevator cab, stepping in right behind her. He frantically pressed the lobby button, his eyes darting wildly between me and the closing doors. The heavy metal doors began to slide shut. The very last thing I saw before the doors sealed completely was Nia's furious, tear-stained face glaring at me through the narrowing gap. And then, with a soft, mechanical click, they were gone. The penthouse returned to its peaceful, quiet state. The soft jazz music drifted back into my awareness. I walked over to the glass table, picked up my wine glass, and took a long, satisfying sip. The first battle was over, and I had crushed them effortlessly. But I knew the real war was just beginning. Tomorrow the entire family would come for me. And I was absolutely ready to burn their toxic kingdom to the ground. I woke up the next morning feeling a sense of profound peace. The events of the previous night played in my mind like a satisfying movie. Carter and Naya were finally experiencing the consequences of their own actions. I poured myself a cup of black coffee and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse. The Atlanta sun was shining brightly over the city I had conquered. My phone sat quietly on the marble counter. I had blocked my sister and her husband completely. I assumed I would have at least a few days of silence before their legal reality fully set in. But I had underestimated the sheer manipulative speed of my family. My phone buzzed aggressively against the marble. It was a text message from my cousin David. He still lived in the old neighborhood and sang in the church choir. The message was short and terrifying. "Come to the church right now, Maya." Aunt Estelle collapsed. She had a massive heart attack. It does not look good. My heart stopped beating for a full second. The coffee cup slipped from my fingers and shattered against the floor, sending dark liquid splashing across the pristine tiles. For 6 years, I had built a fortress around my emotions. I had trained myself to feel absolutely nothing for the woman who had locked me out in the rain. I had convinced myself that Estelle was just a stranger who happened to share my DNA. But the words heart attack bypassed every single wall I had built. She was still my mother. The primal instinct of a child terrified of losing their parent took over my body completely. I did not bother to change my clothes. I was still wearing a simple silk blouse and tailored trousers. I grabbed my car keys and ran out the door. The elevator ride down felt like it took hours. I practically sprinted through the lobby, ignoring the confused look on my concierge's face. I jumped into my black SUV and tore out of the parking garage. I broke every speed limit driving down the highway toward the south side of the city. My mind was racing with horrible images. I pictured her lying on a stretcher, struggling to breathe. I wondered if I was already too late. I wondered if the stress of finding out about Nia and Carter's financial ruin had literally broken her heart. Guilt is a powerful weapon, and my family knew exactly how to wield it even from a distance. I thought about all the Sundays we used to spend at this exact church when I was a little girl. I thought about how my mother used to hold my hand during the choir performances before she decided Nia was the only child who mattered. I drove recklessly, weaving through the morning traffic, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I took the exit so fast the tires screeched against the asphalt. I navigated the familiar neighborhood streets until the red brick walls of our family church came into view. I braced myself to see flashing red and blue lights. I expected to see a crowd of crying relatives gathered around the back of an ambulance. But as I pulled into the gravel parking lot, the scene made absolutely no sense. There were no paramedics. There were no sirens. The lot was completely packed with cars, but it looked like a festival, not a medical emergency. I threw the car into park and jumped out, leaving the door wide open. If this were a movie, the camera would be a Steadicam, tracking my every move. It would follow right behind my shoulder, capturing my rushed, anxious footsteps as I ran across the gravel. It would capture the confusion washing over my face as the smell of charcoal smoke and the sound of upbeat gospel music drifted through the warm morning air. I pushed past the side gate of the churchyard, my chest heaving as I gasped for air. I was preparing to fight my way through a crowd of mourners. Instead, I walked straight into a massive Sunday family barbecue. The camera tracking my movement would come to an abrupt, jarring halt. The focus would shift sharply from my panicked face to the scene unfolding under the large white tents. There were colorful streamers strung between the trees. Dozens of my aunts, uncles, and cousins were sitting at picnic tables eating plates of potato salad and baked beans. A massive banner hung over the main pavilion. It read, "Happy Anniversary, Nia and Carter." And right in the center of it all, standing next to a massive smoking grill, was the woman who was supposedly dying of a heart attack. The camera would pull focus directly onto Estelle. She was wearing a bright yellow sundress and a pristine white apron. She was holding a pair of metal tongs, casually flipping a rack of ribs. She was laughing loudly at a joke my uncle had just told. Her face was glowing with health. There was absolutely nothing wrong with her heart, except that it was entirely devoid of empathy. I stopped dead in my tracks. The adrenaline that had been pumping through my veins instantly turned to ice. I had not rushed to a medical emergency. I had walked completely blind into a carefully orchestrated trap. They knew I would never answer a phone call from Nia. They knew I would ignore any demand from Carter. But they knew the one thing that would drag me out of my penthouse and bring me straight to them was the threat of my mother dying. They weaponized my own humanity against me. They had used my cousin David as a pawn. They probably told him to send that exact text message or simply took his phone to send it knowing I would respond to him. The level of sociopathic planning it took to fake a heart attack just to force a business meeting was staggering. Several relatives turned and noticed me standing near the gate. The laughter slowly died down. The music suddenly seemed too loud for the heavy silence spreading through the yard. People started whispering to each other, pointing in my direction. I was the villain who had abandoned the family. I was the rich, arrogant daughter who never came around anymore. They had no idea about the stolen identity or the $50,000. They only knew the lies Estelle had fed them for the last 6 years. And now they were staring at me like I was a ghost crashing a celebration. Estelle turned away from the grill. She saw me standing there breathing heavily, my designer clothes slightly rumpled from my panicked drive. Her eyes locked onto mine. She did not look surprised to see me. She did not look apologetic for faking a massive medical emergency. Instead, a slow, perfectly practiced fake smile spread across her face. It was the same smile she used to charm the church elders and manipulate the neighbors. It was a smile that hid decades of cruelty. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Nia and Carter sitting at the head table of the pavilion. Carter was nursing a beer, trying to look relaxed, but his knuckles were white as he gripped the bottle. Nia was sitting unnaturally straight, her eyes darting between me and our mother. They had run to Estelle the second they left my penthouse last night. They had cried and played the victims. Estelle had immediately mobilized the entire extended family to ambush me in public. It was a classic tactic in our community. Use the pressure of the crowd to force compliance. Force me to save Carter's company right here in front of God and everyone, or look like the monster who ruined her sister's anniversary. I stood my ground. The initial shock was fading rapidly, replaced by a cold, calculated fury. They thought dragging me into a public arena would make me fold. They thought the presence of our relatives would intimidate me into handing over my empire. They were completely wrong. I took a deep breath, smoothed my hair back, and took a deliberate step forward into the yard. Let the games begin. As I walked further into the manicured churchyard, the cheerful gospel music that had been booming from the portable speakers was abruptly turned off. My Uncle Earl, who was manning the sound system, lowered the volume dial until only the sound of sizzling meat and uncomfortable shifting remained. Over 50 pairs of eyes were locked onto me. The air was thick with the smell of charcoal, roasted sweet potatoes, and deep-fried chicken. But I suddenly felt completely nauseous. I could feel the collective judgment radiating from the picnic tables. To them, I was the prodigal daughter who had abandoned her struggling family for the high life in the big city. I was the one who never called, who missed the holidays, who thought she was too good for her roots. Estelle wiped her hands on her pristine white apron and rushed toward me. She did not walk. She practically stumbled, executing a masterful performance of a distressed elderly mother. "Oh, my baby girl," she cried out, her voice loud enough to echo off the red brick walls of the church. "You actually came. I prayed to the good Lord you would not ignore your family in our hour of deepest need." She threw her arms around my neck, pulling me into a suffocating hug. She smelled like barbecue smoke and expensive department store perfume. I kept my arms firmly at my sides, refusing to return the embrace. I stood as rigid as a statue. She pulled back, gripping my shoulders tightly. Her eyes were completely dry, but her face was twisted into a dramatic expression of profound sorrow. "Please, Maya," she begged loudly, making sure every single aunt, uncle, and cousin sitting under those white tents could hear her clearly. "Please tell me you are going to call off this terrible vendetta. Please tell me you are not going to destroy your sister's life just because you are still angry with me." A collective gasp rippled through the churchyard. My Aunt Beatrice, A woman who had never worked a day in her life but judged everyone else's financial decisions stood up from her folding chair. She was still wearing her elaborate Sunday church hat, and her eyes were wide with manufactured outrage. "What is she talking about?" Estelle Beatrice demanded, her voice sharp with indignation. "What is Maya doing to our sweet Nia?" Estelle turned to face the crowd, wiping a non-existent tear from her cheek. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "She is using her fancy new job at that corporate investment firm to bankrupt Carter's real estate business." Estelle cried, her voice cracking perfectly on cue. "She bought up all of his commercial loans, and now she is trying to foreclose on them by tomorrow morning. She wants to leave Nia and Carter out on the street. And for what? Because she is still jealous that Nia had a beautiful wedding 6 years ago. Because she cannot stand to see her sister happy and successful." The yard erupted into angry murmurs. I looked around at the faces of my relatives. These were the people who had watched me grow up. They had watched me do all of Nia's chores while she went to the mall. They had watched me wear her worn-out hand-me-down clothes. They had watched me struggle and scrape for every single grade I earned while Nia coasted on her looks. And yet they were so perfectly willing to believe that I was the monster. It was easier for them to villainize the independent woman who left than to question the toxic dynamic of the family that stayed behind. I looked over at the head table sitting under the large anniversary banner. Nia was putting on the performance of an absolute lifetime. She had her face buried in Carter's chest, her shoulders shaking violently as if she were sobbing uncontrollably. Carter had his arm wrapped protectively around her, glaring at me with a look of manufactured righteous anger. He was playing the role of the stoic, wealthy white protector, defending his fragile black wife from her aggressive, unhinged sister. They looked like the perfect tragic couple victimized by a bitter, lonely spinster. It was sickening. My Uncle George, a man who frequently borrowed money from my mother and never paid it back, stepped forward. He pointed a long metal barbecue fork directly at my chest. "You ought to be deeply ashamed of yourself, Maya," he bellowed, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "Your sister is family. That boy Carter took her in and gave her a good, respectable name. And you are sitting up there in your luxury penthouse trying to tear their marriage down because you do not have a man of your own. You are a disgrace to this bloodline. We raised you to lift your sisters up, not drag them through the mud." Even my cousin David, the one who had sent the fake text message, looked at me with deep disappointment. "I thought you had changed, Maya," he said, shaking his head sadly. "I really thought you had grown up. But you are just as cold and selfish as you were when you walked out on your own mother 6 years ago. You did not even come back for Thanksgiving when Big Mama was sick. You only care about your money." The social pressure was designed to be absolutely suffocating. In our community, the family unit is everything. The approval of the elders is the ultimate currency. To be publicly shamed by the aunties and uncles in the middle of a Sunday cookout is supposed to break your spirit completely. It is a psychological tactic designed to force you into absolute submission, to make you beg for forgiveness and fall right back into line. Estelle had orchestrated this entire event specifically to break me. She wanted me to feel so isolated, so despised, and so guilty that I would sign away my financial leverage just to buy back their fake affection. They hurled insult after insult at me. They called me bitter. They called me jealous. They said my corporate success had made me arrogant and heartless. They accused me of forgetting where I came from and acting like I was better than the people who raised me. Every word was a calculated strike at my emotional armor. I stood in the center of the yard, completely surrounded by hostile faces. For a fleeting second, the little girl inside me, the one who just wanted her mother to love her equally, felt a sharp, painful pang of grief. But the ruthless chief executive officer I had become quickly crushed that weakness into dust. I kept my eyes locked on Nia. I watched her peek out from Carter's chest to gauge the reaction of the crowd. When she thought no one else was looking, a smug, triumphant smirk flashed across her tear-stained face. She thought she had won. She thought the sheer weight of public humiliation would force me to retreat and cancel the massive foreclosure. She thought I would crumble under the weight of our mother's theatrics. She thought I was still the 26-year-old girl she could easily manipulate. I did not interrupt them. I let them exhaust their vocabulary of insults. I let my mother cry her fake tears and wail about her broken heart. I let my Uncle George shake his fork at me and preach about family loyalty. I stood there with perfect posture, my expression completely unreadable and cold. I was not going to yell. I was not going to defend myself against their baseless accusations. I was not going to match their chaotic emotional energy. I was going to let them build their tower of lies as high as possible before I kicked out the foundational pillar holding the entire thing up. The screaming and shaming eventually began to die down. The yard fell into a tense, expectant silence. The only sound was the quiet hiss of the barbecue grill. Everyone was waiting for me to break down crying. Everyone was waiting for me to apologize, to beg for my mother's forgiveness, and to promise to save Carter's failing company. I let the silence stretch out, making them squirm in their seats. I looked directly at Estelle, who was watching me like a hawk waiting for me to surrender. It was time to close the trap they thought they had set for me. The silence stretched until it became physically uncomfortable for the people sitting at the picnic tables. They shifted in their seats, coughing nervously and looking away. Estelle quickly realized that the public shaming tactic had failed. I had not dropped to my knees to beg for forgiveness. I had not burst into tears. I was standing there looking at her with the cold, analytical detachment of a corporate raider assessing a bankrupt asset. The victim she expected to bully was nowhere to be found. So she decided to pivot to her secondary strategy: intimate intimidation. Estelle raised her hands, gesturing for the crowd to settle down. She plastered a look of profound maternal agony across her face. "Please, everyone," she called out, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "Give me a moment alone with my daughter. Family matters must be handled with grace. She is just confused and hurting. Let me talk some sense into her." A murmur of sympathetic agreement rippled through the yard. They all thought they were witnessing the boundless grace of a loving mother dealing with a wayward child. My Uncle George nodded solemnly and sat back down. Estelle turned back to me, holding out her hands as if she were approaching a frightened animal. She took 3 quick steps forward and closed the distance between us. Before I could step back, she reached out and grabbed my right arm. If a camera were filming this moment, it would punch in for an extreme close-up on Estelle's manicured hand squeezing my wrist. The lens would capture the violent contrast between her polished pink fingernails and the brutal bone-crushing force of her grip. It would highlight her knuckles turning stark white from the pressure. It would show the angry red marks instantly appearing on my skin where her fingers dug into my flesh. It was a grip designed to inflict physical pain while looking like a tender maternal hold to the onlookers standing 20 feet away. Estelle pulled me hard to the side, dragging me behind the thick trunk of a massive oak tree near the edge of the churchyard. The thick branches provided just enough cover to shield our faces from the crowd sitting under the pavilion. The second we were out of their direct line of sight, the mask of the heartbroken mother completely vanished. The fake tears evaporated. Her facial features hardened into a mask of pure, venomous rage. Her eyes narrowed into dark, cruel slits. "Listen to me, you ungrateful little brat," she hissed, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper that was far more terrifying than her theatrical screams. "You are going to sign the release papers right now. You are going to call your office and cancel that foreclosure on Carter's firm today." I looked down at her hand, still digging aggressively into my wrist. I did not flinch. I did not try to pull away. I simply looked back up into her eyes, letting her see the absolute void where my fear used to be. "And if I refuse," I asked, my voice perfectly calm. Estelle twisted my arm slightly, digging her thumb directly into my pulse point. "If you refuse, I swear to God I will ruin your name in this community forever." She spat the words, hitting my face like toxic darts. "Do you think I am playing a game with you, Maya? I know how to destroy a reputation. I will go to the local news stations. I will call the business journals. I will sit in front of a camera and tell the entire state of Georgia that the great CEO of M Corp is a predator who uses her wealth to steal from her own impoverished family." She leaned in closer, her breath hot against my cheek. "I will tell them you are targeting minority-owned businesses out of pure spite. I will organize a boycott against your firm. I will have the church elders draft a letter of condemnation and send it to your board of directors. By the time I am done with you, your precious company will be a public relations nightmare. Your investors will drop you like a bad habit, and you will be right back in the gutter where you belong. I stared at the woman who gave birth to me. It was a surreal experience. She was threatening to systematically destroy my career, my livelihood, and my public standing, all to protect a white son-in-law who had secretly embezzled millions of dollars and bankrupted his own company. She did not care about the truth. She did not care that Carter had lied to her. She only cared about the social currency his last name provided. Carter was her trophy. He was her proof that the family had ascended to the upper echelons of society, and she would sacrifice her own flesh and blood without a second thought to protect that illusion. She reached into the deep pocket of her pristine white apron with her free hand. She pulled out a folded piece of paper and a black ink pen. She shoved the paper aggressively against my chest, forcing me to take it. Nia had her lawyer draft this up this morning. Estelle demanded, her grip on my wrist tightening even further. It is a full cancellation of the debt and a transfer of the commercial deeds back to Carter's family trust. Sign it. Sign it right now and walk back out there and apologize to your sister. Tell everyone you made a terrible mistake. You owe us this, Maya. We gave you everything. Carter's family is our ticket to the upper class, and I will not let a bitter, lonely little girl drag us back to the bottom. I looked over her shoulder toward the pavilion. Through the leaves of the oak tree, I could see Nia and Carter watching us intently. Carter had stopped pretending to comfort his wife. He was sitting on the edge of the picnic table, bouncing his leg anxiously. Nia was sipping from a plastic cup, a smug, expectant look on her face. She truly believed Mommy was handling the problem. She believed that just like 6 years ago, Estelle would bully me into taking the fall so she could keep living her fake fairy tale life. The physical pain in my wrist was sharp and throbbing, but it grounded me. It reminded me that this woman was not my mother. She was simply an adversary standing between me and the justice I had spent 6 years working to achieve. She had shown her hand. She had laid out her threats. And in doing so, she had severed the final microscopic thread of emotional attachment I had left for her. I slowly raised my left hand. I did not strike her. I did not shove her. I simply placed my fingers over her manicured hand, the one that was bruising my right wrist. With slow, deliberate, and overwhelming physical strength, I pried her fingers off my arm one by one. Estelle's eyes widened in genuine shock as I forcefully broke her grip. She tried to hold on, but she was weak and I was not. I tossed her hand aside as if I were discarding a piece of trash. Estelle stumbled back half a step, rubbing her hand, massaging the fingers I had just bent backward. "You listen to me, Maya," she started, her voice shaking slightly from the sudden physical rejection. "No," I interrupted, my voice dropping to a low, terrifying register. "You listen to me, Estelle. You think you can go to the news. You think you can ruin my reputation. You think you hold the cards here because you managed to gather 50 people in a churchyard to yell at me. You have absolutely no idea what you are dealing with." I looked down at the piece of paper she had shoved into my chest. It was exactly what she said it was. A hastily drafted legal document demanding the immediate release of the commercial liens. It was amateurish and completely unenforceable, but it proved their sheer desperation. I let out a long, heavy sigh. I let my shoulders drop. I allowed a look of total defeat to wash over my face. I needed her to believe that her threats had worked. I needed her to believe she had won, so I could set the stage for the final execution. I looked back up at Estelle, my eyes completely blank. "You want me to sign this?" I asked, my voice sounding hollow and beaten. Estelle immediately regained her arrogant posture. She smoothed down her apron and jutted her chin out. "Yes, I do," she commanded, holding the black pen out toward me. "I knew you would eventually see reason. You are smart enough to know you cannot win a war against your own mother." I reached out and took the pen from her hand. The plastic felt cold against my skin. I looked at the pen, then at the paper, then toward the crowd of relatives who were pretending not to watch us from the pavilion. I had to bring this back out into the open. I had to let them all hear the truth. "Fine," I whispered, hanging my head in mock surrender. Let us go back out there. I will sign it in front of Carter. I will sign it in front of everyone." A triumphant smile stretched across Estelle's face. It was the smile of a predator who had just broken the spirit of its prey. She turned around and began marching back toward the white tents, her head held high, completely unaware that she was leading herself and her golden child directly into a slaughterhouse. I took a deep breath, flexed my bruised wrist, and followed her out from behind the tree. The trap was finally set, and I held the trigger. I walked out from behind the thick oak tree, following 2 steps behind my mother. Estelle was marching toward the main pavilion with the proud, arrogant strut of a conquering general. She held her head high, her shoulders pulled back, radiating an aura of absolute triumph. She actually caught the eye of my Aunt Beatrice and gave her a slow, deliberate wink. It was a silent signal to the rest of the family that she had successfully handled the rebellion. The prodigal daughter had been broken and brought to heel. I kept my eyes lowered to the grass, playing the part of the defeated child to absolute perfection. I let my shoulders slump slightly. I held the hastily drafted legal document in my left hand, letting it hang limply by my side. I held the black pen in my right hand. To the dozens of relatives sitting at the picnic tables eating their barbecue, I looked like a woman who had just lost a war. I could feel the collective shift in the atmosphere. The heavy, tense judgment that had suffocated the yard just a few moments ago began to dissolve into a smug, collective satisfaction. They had successfully bullied me into submission, and they were incredibly proud of themselves. We reached the front of the main pavilion. Nia was sitting at the head table looking like a queen presiding over her loyal subjects. She had stopped pretending to cry. Her makeup was perfectly intact, and a massive, self-satisfied smile was plastered across her face. Carter was sitting next to her, leaning back in his folding chair, with his arms crossed over his chest. When he saw me walking back with my head down, he let out a loud, audible sigh of relief. The terrified, broken man who had fled my penthouse the night before was suddenly replaced by the arrogant white savior once again. He truly believed his mother-in-law had just saved his crumbling empire. I stopped in the center of the yard, right in front of their table. Uncle George was standing near the large portable speakers, holding the wireless microphone he had used to publicly berate me earlier. I walked slowly over to him. I held out my empty hand. "Let me say my piece," I said, my voice soft and deliberately shaky. "Let me do this the right way, Uncle George." George looked down at me, his chest puffed out with patriarchal pride. He nodded slowly, clearly enjoying my apparent humility. He handed the microphone over to me, giving my shoulder a firm, patronizing pat. "That is a good girl, Maya," he said loudly enough for the front row to hear. "You do the right thing for your family, and God will bless your business." I took the microphone. The cold, hard plastic felt grounding in my palm. I turned around to face the entire churchyard. Over 50 members of my extended family fell completely silent. They put down their forks and their plastic cups. All eyes were locked on me, waiting for my public apology, waiting for my surrender. I raised the microphone to my mouth. I looked directly at Estelle, who had taken a seat next to Nia and Carter at the head table. She was beaming with pride. "My mother has made it very clear what is expected of me today." I began, my voice carrying clearly over the speakers, echoing off the brick walls of the church. She reminded me of the sacrifices this family has made. She reminded me of my duty as a daughter and as a sister. She told me that family must always come first, no matter what happens. We must protect our own. And above all, we must protect the prestigious name that Carter so graciously gave to my sister when he married her. A few of the older aunts in the crowd nodded their heads in agreement, murmuring soft words of approval. Nia reached out and grabbed Carter's hand, intertwining her fingers with his. She looked at me with an expression of pure, condescending pity. I raised my left hand, holding up the folded piece of legal paper Estelle had forced upon me. I uncapped the black pen with my right hand. I looked down at the document. "So, I will do what is asked of me." I continued, my tone perfectly flat and devoid of any emotion. "I will sign this document. I will instruct my private equity firm to immediately release all commercial liens held against Carter's real estate brokerage. I will cancel the foreclosure. I will forgive his massive multi-million-dollar debt entirely. Carter closed his eyes and exhaled a massive breath, dropping his head back against his chair. The sheer relief washing over his face was pathetic to witness. Estelle began to softly clap her hands, prompting a few other family members to join in. They were literally applauding my financial surrender. I pressed the tip of the black pen against the signature line at the bottom of the page. Then I stopped. I froze completely. The pen hovered just a millimeter above the paper. The scattered applause slowly died down as people noticed my hesitation. I slowly lowered the pen. I lifted my head and locked my eyes directly onto Carter's face. The terrifying icy stare of the corporate predator returned to my eyes instantly, completely shattering the illusion of the defeated daughter. "Fine," I said, my voice suddenly dropping an octave, losing all of its fake humility and replacing it with pure, lethal authority. "I will sign this paper. But before I put my name on a binding legal document that writes off millions of dollars, there is a minor detail about this debt that I think this family needs to hear." The yard went dead silent. The smug smile on Estelle's face faltered. Naya sat up straight, her grip on Carter's hand tightening. "Does everyone here know exactly what collateral Carter used to get that massive loan from my company in the first place?" I asked into the microphone, my words ringing out with crystal clear precision. The confusion in the crowd was immediate. People looked at each other, furrowing their brows. They did not understand corporate finance. They did not understand the mechanics of commercial lending. But they understood the tone of my voice. They understood that I had just dropped a live grenade into the middle of their celebration. Carter's eyes snapped open. The relief vanished from his features, instantly replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. His face dropped completely, losing all of its color. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff and realized there was no safety net below him. He knew exactly what he had used as collateral. He knew what he had done to secure that money when the bank stopped returning his calls. And he knew that if I said the words out loud, he would be entirely destroyed. "Shut up!" Carter yelled, his voice cracking with panic. He scrambled to his feet so fast that his metal folding chair tipped backward and crashed violently against the concrete patio. "Do not say another word, Maya. Turn off that microphone right now." He lunged forward, vaulting over the edge of the picnic table in a desperate, frantic attempt to rip the microphone out of my hand. He was completely out of control, driven by the primal terror of a man whose darkest secret was about to be dragged into the light. But I did not flinch. I did not even take a step back. I just stood there watching him fly across the table toward me. Because what my family did not realize was that I had not driven to this church completely alone. I am the chief executive officer of a massive financial institution, and I do not attend hostile ambushes without adequate preparation. I had parked my vehicle near the gate, but my personal security detail had arrived 10 minutes before me in a separate black SUV. They had been standing quietly by the side entrance of the yard, blending into the background, waiting for my signal. Before Carter's outstretched hands could even come close to the microphone, a massive shadow stepped in front of me. Sterling, my head of security, moved with a terrifying fluid speed that completely defied his massive size. He was a towering man, easily 6'4", built like a solid brick wall, and dressed in a tailored black suit. Sterling stepped directly into Carter's path. He did not throw a punch. He simply raised his large hand and planted it firmly against the center of Carter's chest. He shoved forward using only a fraction of his strength, but it was more than enough. Carter's forward momentum was instantly halted. He was thrown backward, suspended in the air for a fraction of a second, before he crashed hard into the wooden picnic table, sending plates of food, plastic cups, and silverware flying in every direction. He hit the ground, groaning in pain, clutching his ribs. The entire churchyard erupted into chaos. Women screamed and jumped out of their seats. Uncle George rushed forward, but stopped dead in his tracks when Sterling leveled a cold, warning glare in his direction. Nia shrieked and scrambled over the spilled food to get to her husband, pulling frantically at his suit jacket. Estelle stood up, knocking her chair over her hands, flying to her mouth in absolute shock. The illusion of her perfect family gathering was completely shattered, replaced by violence and panic. Sterling stood casually in front of me, adjusting his cuffs, keeping his eyes scanning the crowd for any other threats. I remained standing exactly where I was, the microphone still gripped tightly in my hand. The crowd was completely paralyzed by the sudden escalation. The tension was suffocating. I had their undivided attention. The hook was set deep into their skin, and I was about to reel them all in. The churchyard remained frozen in absolute shock. Sterling stood like a stone monument between me and the picnic table where Carter was currently curled on his side, groaning and clutching his ribs. Uncle George had his mouth hanging open, entirely speechless. The rest of the family sat paralyzed at the picnic tables, holding their breath. They had expected a tearful apology. They had expected a broken daughter begging for forgiveness. They had absolutely no idea how to process the calculated violence of a corporate execution. I did not wait for them to recover. I reached into the pocket of my tailored trousers and pulled out my smartphone. Earlier that morning, I had instructed my security and tech team to secure more than just the perimeter. I tapped a single button on my screen, sending a remote command to the wireless receiver plugged into Uncle Earl's audio-visual setup. Behind the main pavilion, a massive white projector screen had been displaying a sickeningly sweet slideshow of Nia and Carter's wedding photos. Pictures of them laughing on a yacht, posing in front of a country club, and cutting a massive 5-tier cake cycled on an endless loop. Suddenly, the screen flickered. The smiling faces of the happy couple vanished. In their place, a stark, high-resolution image of a black and white legal document appeared. It towered over the yard, glowing brightly in the morning shade. "Commercial loans of that magnitude require collateral," I said, speaking into the microphone, my voice echoing off the brick walls with cold, terrifying clarity. "Banks do not simply hand over millions of dollars on a promise and a confident smile. They need a hard asset. They need something of equal or greater value to seize and liquidate in the event that the borrower defaults." I took a slow, deliberate step toward the crowd. Carter's family business was completely underwater. His corporate credit was absolute garbage. No reputable financial institution in the state of Georgia would lend him a single dime based on his portfolio. So in order to secure the massive cash injection, he desperately needed to maintain his luxury lifestyle. He had to look outside his own assets. He had to find something entirely unencumbered by debt. I raised my hand and pointed directly at the massive projector screen. "I want everyone here to read the address listed under the property collateral section," I commanded. "Read it out loud." The aunts and uncles squinted at the screen. The text was enlarged, crisp, and undeniably clear. The silence was broken by Aunt Beatrice. She stood up, dropping her paper plate onto the grass. Her voice trembled as she read the familiar street name and zip code. "That is Big Mama's house," she whispered, her hands flying to her chest. "Exactly," I said, my voice slicing through the rising murmurs of the crowd. "Big Mama's house. The house our great-grandparents bought with physical cash they saved in coffee cans because the banks would not lend to black folks during segregation. The house where 5 generations of this family celebrated Thanksgiving, sought refuge, and built a legacy. Carter did not just borrow money to fund his sports cars and his country club fees. He took the deed to our ancestral home and handed it over to a private equity firm." A collective gasp of pure horror ripped through the pavilion. The anger that had been directed at me just 5 minutes ago instantly evaporated, replaced by a profound, sickening sense of betrayal. Big Mama's house was not just a piece of real estate, it was sacred ground. It was the physical embodiment of our family's survival and success. "But wait," I continued, refusing to let the momentum slow down. "Carter is not a blood relative. His name is nowhere on that deed. The only person legally authorized to mortgage that property is the matriarch of this family, the executor of the estate, my mother." Estelle stepped forward from the head table, her face entirely drained of color. She looked at the screen, then at me, her eyes wide with genuine panic. "I never signed anything," she stammered, her voice shaking so badly she could barely form the words. "I would never put Big Mama's house up for a loan. I would never risk that house." "I did not sign that paper, Maya." "I know you didn't, Mom," I replied softly. I tapped my phone screen again. The projector image instantly zoomed in on the final page of the loan agreement. It filled the entire screen with the signature block. There, in clear, dark ink, was Estelle's full legal name, written in a cursive script that looked incredibly familiar. That is your signature, Estelle, I said, letting the microphone amplify the devastating truth, or at least it is a very practiced forgery of it. And Carter could not have done it alone. A white man cannot just walk into a bank with the deed to a property owned by an elderly black woman and sign her name without raising massive red flags. The lenders required an in-person signature verification with a licensed notary, a notary who just so happens to be Nia's best friend from her college sorority. I turned slowly to look at my sister. Nia had scrambled backward away from the picnic table where Carter was still groaning. Her hands were covering her mouth and her eyes were darting frantically around the yard looking for an escape route. Carter provided the asset, I said, my voice ringing out like a judge delivering a guilty verdict. But Nia facilitated the fraud. She helped her husband steal your house, Mom. The heavy metal barbecue tongs Estelle had been holding this entire time slipped from her fingers. They hit the concrete patio with a loud, piercing clatter that echoed through the dead, silent yard. Estelle did not even flinch. She just stood there staring at the golden child she had protected and worshipped for 30 years. "Mom, please!" Nia cried out, her voice cracking into a hysterical shriek. "He told me it was just temporary. He swore to me we would pay it back in a month. We just needed the cash to keep the business afloat so his parents would not find out we were broke." "I never wanted to hurt you, Mom. He made me do it." Carter pushed himself up onto his knees, spitting a mouthful of blood onto the grass. "Do not put this entirely on me, you greedy parasite." He coughed, his voice ragged and breathless. "You wanted the mansion. You wanted the designer trips. You are the one who stole the deed out of your mother's lockbox while she was asleep." The crowd erupted into absolute pandemonium. Uncle George grabbed Carter by the collar of his ruined suit and slammed him back down onto the grass, raising his fist. Several cousins rushed forward to intervene, shouting and cursing. Aunt Beatrice began to wail loudly, calling on Jesus to strike the demons out of the yard. But the most devastating reaction belonged to Estelle. The proud, arrogant woman who had just threatened to ruin my reputation in the community looked like she was physically shrinking. Her shoulders collapsed. The pristine white apron she wore suddenly looked like a tragic costume. The alliance she had built with her perfect daughter and her wealthy white son-in-law shattered into a million irreparable pieces right in front of her eyes. "You sold my house," Estelle whispered. Her voice was barely audible over the screaming crowd, but I saw her lips form the words. She took a trembling step toward Nia. "You sold your grandmother's house to pay for your fake life. Mom, I am sorry." Nia sobbed, backing away from Estelle, holding her hands up defensively. Estelle lunged forward, moving with a speed and ferocity fueled by pure heartbreak. She grabbed Nia by the shoulders, shaking her violently, her perfectly styled hair falling wildly around her face. "You ungrateful thief!" Estelle screamed, her voice tearing through the yard. "I gave you everything. I threw your sister out on the street for you. I lied for you. And you stole my home." The family members who had previously stood in solidarity to humiliate me were now actively tearing each other apart. The toxicity they had directed at me for 6 years had finally been turned inward, and it was acting like a rapidly spreading poison. I stood perfectly still watching the destruction unfold. I did not feel a single ounce of joy or vindication. I only felt the cold satisfaction of a surgeon who had successfully removed a massive malignant tumor. But the operation was not quite finished. I raised the microphone back to my lips, ready to deliver the final lethal dose of reality. I let the screaming and the physical tearing apart of my family continue for exactly 30 seconds. It was a symphony of destruction that they had composed entirely by themselves, and I wanted them to hear every single note of it. I watched my mother ripping at the fabric of her golden child's designer dress. I watched my uncles shouting profanities at the white savior they had worshipped just an hour ago. The manicured lawn of the churchyard was covered in spilled baked beans, trampled potato salad, and shattered illusions. The toxic foundation of their lives had finally collapsed. Then I raised the wireless microphone back to my lips. "I am not finished," I said, my voice booming through the heavy outdoor speakers. The sheer volume and the absolute terrifying calm in my tone commanded immediate compliance. The screaming abruptly stopped. Estelle froze, her hands still clutching the collar of Nia's dress. Nia was sobbing uncontrollably, her chest heaving as she kept her eyes glued to the grass. Carter remained on the ground, clutching his bruised ribs, his face pale and slick with a cold sweat. The entire extended family turned back to face me, looking like a terrified audience trapped in a theater while the building burned down around them. Forging a signature to secure a multi-million-dollar commercial loan is a federal crime, I stated, letting the heavy legal reality settle over the yard. But that is a matter for the criminal justice system and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I am not here today as an officer of the law. I am here representing the private equity firm that legally purchased and currently owns that massive debt. And my financial institution does not care about your family drama. My financial institution only cares about the math. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, my heels clicking sharply against the concrete patio. The crowd instinctively took a collective step backward away from me. And the math says that Carter has not made a single payment toward the principal or the interest of this commercial loan in over 8 months. I continued, my voice slicing through the warm morning air like a freshly sharpened blade. When a borrower defaults on a secured commercial loan of this magnitude, the lender has the absolute legal right to seize the physical collateral immediately. There are no more extensions. There are no more grace periods. There are no negotiations. If a camera were filming this exact moment, the director would order a violent whip pan across the yard. The lens would blur as it snapped frantically from face to face, capturing the sheer devastation of the antagonists. It would whip first to Estelle, capturing her jaw dropping open as the blood rushed out of her face, her perfectly styled hair now a chaotic mess. It would snap to Nia, capturing the thick black streaks of expensive mascara running down her cheeks as her mouth opened in a silent scream. And finally it would whip down to Carter, capturing his bloodied lip and the hollow dead stare of a man who knew his entire life was completely over. Because Carter is broke and defaulted on the loan, the bank is seizing the property. I announced, dropping the secondary bomb with the calculated precision of a drone strike. Big Mama's house no longer belongs to this family. The deed was legally transferred to the holding company of M Corp at exactly 9 o'clock this morning. The foreclosure is absolute and it is final. Estelle let go of Nia's dress and fell heavily to her knees. The damp grass stained her pristine white apron, but she did not even notice. No, she gasped, her voice a weak, raspy whisper. No, Maya, please. That is my home. I have lived in that house for 40 years. It is all I have left. You lived there for 40 years, until you decided that playing dress-up with Carter's family was more important than protecting your own legacy, I replied, looking down at her without a single ounce of pity. You gave Nia the keys to the kingdom because she was pretty and compliant. And she handed those keys directly to a man who burned your kingdom to the ground just to keep his luxury sports cars and his country club membership. You chose this, Estelle. You built this bed, and now the bank is repossessing it. I turned my attention to the aunts, uncles, and cousins who were standing frozen under the white tents. For those of you who rely on that house for Sunday dinners, for a place to stay when times get tough, for a symbol of our family's enduring strength, you can thank Carter and Nia for wiping it off the map, I said, projecting my voice so every single relative could hear the absolute truth. The generational wealth that Big Mama broke her back scrubbing floors to build has been completely eradicated by the golden child you all worshipped. You are all about to be homeless. Aunt Beatrice let out a loud, agonizing wail and collapsed into a folding chair, clutching her chest. Uncle George took off his hat and crushed it in his hands, his face twisted in pure grief. The house was the anchor of our entire extended family, and Nia had sold it for a fake designer lifestyle. The hatred radiating from the crowd toward Nia and Carter was now palpable. It was a thick, toxic cloud of absolute resentment. Tomorrow morning at precisely 8 o'clock, the county sheriff will arrive at the property. I continued detailing the exact mechanics of their ruin. They will be accompanied by a team of professional locksmiths and a private property management crew. They will change every single lock on the front and back doors. They will board up the windows if necessary. They will physically remove any personal belongings left inside and place them on the curb. And anyone still standing inside the property lines at 8:01 will be immediately arrested and charged with criminal trespassing. Nia let out a high-pitched shriek and threw herself onto the grass, reaching out toward me. Maya, you cannot do this, she sobbed violently, her voice cracking. Where are we supposed to go? Carter's family accounts are frozen. We do not have any cash. We cannot even rent an apartment with our credit scores. You are throwing your own mother and your sister out onto the street. We will literally have nowhere to sleep tomorrow night. I looked at my older sister writhing on the ground in her ruined designer dress. I remembered the night I stood on the porch in the pouring rain holding nothing but a torn canvas backpack, begging her to tell the truth so I would not be homeless. I remembered the sound of the deadbolt locking me out. You should have thought about where you were going to sleep before you forged our mother's signature on a federal banking document, Nia, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying icy whisper. 6 years ago, you threw me to the wolves to protect your fake marriage. Now the wolves are here for you, and I am the one leading the pack. Carter let out a pathetic whimper and tried to slowly crawl away across the grass, hoping to escape the wrath of the family he had just bankrupted. He was trying to slither toward the parking lot like a coward. But Sterling, my massive head of security, simply took one step forward and planted his heavy, polished leather shoe firmly onto the hem of Carter's suit jacket, pinning him entirely to the ground. Sterling did not even look down at him. He just kept his cold eyes scanning the crowd, ensuring no one interrupted my final execution. The reality of the situation crashed down on the churchyard with crushing, suffocating weight. There was no magical solution. There was no rich relative coming to save them. The white savior was a broke criminal. The golden child was a fraudulent thief. And the mother who orchestrated my public humiliation was about to be forcibly evicted from her home by armed law enforcement. I had systematically dismantled every single pillar of their toxic alliance and replaced it with a permanent, inescapable nightmare. For a long, agonizing minute, the only sound in the churchyard was the heavy, ragged breathing of my mother. She remained on her knees, staring blankly at the damp grass beneath her. The pristine white apron she wore was heavily stained with dirt and spilled barbecue sauce, looking like a ruined flag of surrender. She was a woman who had spent her entire adult life carefully curating an image of upper-middle-class respectability. She had attended every Sunday service, hosted every holiday dinner, and constantly bragged to the neighbors about her beautiful daughter, who had married into old white money. And in the span of 15 minutes, that entire identity had been completely vaporized. Estelle slowly placed her hands on her knees and pushed herself up from the ground. Her movements were stiff and jerky, like a mechanical toy running out of battery. She did not look at me. She did not look at the projector screen displaying the forged signature. She locked her eyes entirely on Nia. Nia was still sitting on the ground, her ruined designer dress bunched up around her legs. Her expensive makeup was completely washed away by her frantic tears, leaving dark smeared circles around her eyes. When she saw our mother standing up and walking toward her, a flicker of hope flashed across her face. She reached her hands out, expecting the same unconditional comfort and protection she had received every single time she made a mistake in her life. She expected Estelle to pull her into a warm embrace, to smooth her hair, and to tell her that they would figure it out together. "Mom," Nia whimpered, her voice shaking violently. "Mommy, please say something." Estelle stopped right in front of her. She looked down at her golden child, her perfect, beautiful daughter who could do no wrong. Estelle raised her right hand, the same hand that had gripped my wrist with such menacing force just a few moments ago. She pulled her arm back and swung it forward with every single ounce of strength she possessed in her body. The slap echoed through the quiet yard with the sharp, terrifying crack of a firing pistol. The physical force of the blow was so severe that it knocked Nia completely backward. Her head snapped to the side and she crashed hard into the wooden leg of the picnic table behind her. A sharp collective gasp ripped through the crowd of watching relatives. Nobody moved. Nobody tried to intervene. They simply stood frozen in absolute shock as the matriarch of the family violently assaulted her favorite child. "You sold my house!" Estelle screamed, her voice tearing out of her throat with a raw, guttural fury that did not even sound human. "You forged my name. You stole your grandmother's legacy so you could buy designer handbags and take trips to the beach. Nia touched her cheek, her eyes wide with a mixture of sheer terror and absolute disbelief. A bright red handprint was already blooming across her skin. In 34 years, Estelle had never once laid a finger on Nia. She had never even raised her voice at her. Nia had been shielded from every consequence, every punishment, and every harsh reality of life. The sudden violent collapse of her mother's unconditional worship completely broke her mind. "I did not do it!" Nia shrieked, scrambling backward across the grass like a cornered animal, her voice pitched upward into a hysterical screech. "It was Carter. He made me do it. He told me the bank was going to take his cars. He told me his parents would find out he was broke. He said he would divorce me if I did not help him get the money." She pointed a shaking manicured finger at her husband, who was still pinned to the ground beneath the heavy polished shoe of my security chief. "He hired the fake notary." Nia screamed desperately, throwing her husband to the wolves to save her own skin. "He brought the papers to the house. I just signed your name because he told me to. He promised he would pay it back. I am the victim here, Mom. He manipulated me." Carter let out a wet, ragged cough and turned his head, trying to glare at his wife. "You lying, parasitic snake!" he gasped, struggling vainly against Sterling's crushing weight. "You were the one who stole the deed from the lockbox. You knew exactly what you were doing. You spent half of that loan money on yourself." The total collapse of their marriage played out right there in the dirt. There was no loyalty left between them. They were two drowning rats viciously clawing at each other, trying to stay above the water. But the extended family was not interested in their marital disputes. The extended family was interested in blood. The crowd of aunts, uncles, and cousins who had spent the entire morning glaring at me suddenly turned their collective fury toward the head table. The mob mentality of our family had always required a scapegoat. For my entire life, I had been the designated target. I was the one they blamed for every disruption, the one they criticized to feel better about their own miserable lives. But the dynamic had just violently shifted. The golden child had stripped them of their ancestral home, and the mob demanded immediate retribution. Uncle George was the first to break the perimeter. He stomped forward, his face flushed dark red with absolute rage. He kicked the metal folding chair out of his way, sending it clattering across the patio. "You arrogant, selfish little thief," George bellowed, pointing down at Nia. "We praised you. We treated you like royalty. And you sold the roof over your own mother's head to impress a white boy who could not even run his own business." Aunt Beatrice pushed her way to the front of the crowd, her elaborate Sunday hat slightly skewed on her head. She looked at Nia with an expression of pure, unfiltered disgust. "You are a disgrace to this family." Beatrice spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You sat at our tables and acted like you were better than us. You looked down your nose at your own cousins because you lived in a fancy house, and all this time you were nothing but a common criminal." The rest of the family swarmed forward, forming a tight, suffocating circle around Nia and Estelle. The insults flew through the air like heavy stones. They called her a fraud. They called her a traitor. They cursed her name and spat at the ground near her feet. The very same people who had been enthusiastically celebrating her anniversary just 30 minutes ago were now tearing her to shreds with absolute ruthlessness. Nia curled into a tight ball on the grass, covering her head with her arms, sobbing hysterically as the verbal assault rained down on her. She begged for them to stop. She begged her mother to protect her. But Estelle just stood there, staring down at her with cold, dead eyes, offering absolutely no shelter from the storm. I stood a few feet away, completely untouched by the chaos, observing the scene with a profound sense of closure. I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to hurl insults or throw punches. I had simply handed them the ugly, undeniable truth and allowed their own toxic nature to do the rest of the work. The family unit they claimed was so sacred and unbreakable was actually nothing more than a fragile house of cards built on lies and shared delusions. They were so busy destroying each other that they completely forgot I was even there. I was the architect of their destruction, but they were the ones eagerly swinging the hammers. The absolute sweet perfection of my revenge was that I did not have to ruin Nia's life. I just had to step out of the way and let the family she valued so much do it for me. The screaming mass of my relatives formed a tight circle around my sister and my mother. The sheer volume of their collective rage was deafening. They were so consumed by their own betrayal that they completely forgot about the white man who had orchestrated the entire fraud. Sterling, my head of security, had stepped back slightly to form a protective barrier in front of me, ensuring none of the physical chaos spilled in my direction. In doing so, he had lifted his heavy shoe off Carter's ruined suit jacket. Carter lay in the damp grass for a few seconds, assessing the situation. He looked at the mob of angry aunts and uncles tearing his wife apart. He looked at Nia, who was sobbing, and reaching out her hand toward him, begging for her husband to come save her from the wrath of her own family. This was the exact moment a real man would have stood up. This was the moment a devoted partner would have pushed through the crowd, taken the blame, and shielded his wife from the vitriol. But Carter was not a real man. He was a coward who had spent his entire life hiding behind his family's money and his unearned privilege. And now that the money was gone, his true nature was fully exposed for everyone to see. He did not even meet Nia's eyes. He scrambled to his feet, his breath hitching in his chest as he clutched his bruised ribs. He turned his back on his wife and began to quietly limp away from the pavilion. He kept his head down, using the thick smoke billowing from the abandoned barbecue grill as a cover. He was trying to slither away unnoticed, slipping past the fold-out tables and heading straight for the gravel parking lot. He was abandoning his wife, his marriage, and his mother-in-law without a single ounce of hesitation. He did not care what happened to Nia. He just wanted to save himself. I stood safely behind Sterling, watching Carter's pathetic retreat. Nia saw him leaving too. She screamed his name over the crowd, her voice cracking with absolute despair, but he did not even turn around. He just moved faster, breaking into a pathetic, desperate jog. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the keys to his imported luxury sedan. The same sedan he had bought using the money he stole from Big Mama's house. I saw the electronic lights of his car flash from across the yard as he hit the unlock button. He actually thought he was going to get away. He thought he could just drive back to his affluent suburb, pack a bag, and disappear before the financial fallout completely destroyed his life. He reached the edge of the gravel lot, his hand stretching out to grab the door handle of his car. And that was exactly when the sound started. It was faint at first, a high-pitched wail cutting through the warm morning air from a few miles down the road, but it was growing louder by the second. The distinctive alternating pitch of police sirens. Multiple sirens approaching fast from different directions. Carter froze. His hand hovered just an inch from the door handle of his car. His shoulders tensed. He slowly turned his head, looking toward the main road leading up to the church. The sound was no longer faint. It was echoing off the brick walls, screaming through the neighborhood and drowning out the angry shouts of my family in the yard. The flashing red and blue lights began to reflect off the polished surface of his car, casting an eerie glow over his terrified face. He looked back across the yard, his panicked eyes searching frantically until they locked onto mine. I had not moved an inch. I was standing exactly where I had been the entire time, watching him with the calm, detached satisfaction of a chess player who had just declared checkmate. He looked at the approaching lights, then back at me, his mouth opening in a silent scream of realization. I did not call the police after I exposed the forged signature. I did not call them when Carter lunged at me across the picnic table. I had called the authorities before I even left my penthouse this morning. I had sent a secure digital package containing the forged deed, the fraudulently notarized documents, and a comprehensive timeline of the financial fraud directly to the Financial Crimes Division of the local police department and the federal authorities. The ambush at the church was never a threat to me. It was just the holding pen I needed to keep my sister and her husband in one exact location until law enforcement arrived to collect them. 4 heavy police cruisers turned sharply into the gravel parking lot, their tires kicking up a massive cloud of dust and loose rocks. They did not park neatly in the designated spots. They positioned their vehicles aggressively, completely blocking the only exit to the street. The wailing sirens were abruptly cut off, leaving only the harsh crackle of police radios and the slamming of heavy car doors. More than half a dozen officers stepped out of their vehicles, stepping into the morning heat, with their hands resting on their utility belts. Carter was completely trapped. He was standing right next to his luxury car holding his keys, surrounded by law enforcement. An older officer with a thick gray mustache pointed directly at him, commanding him to step away from the vehicle and place his hands behind his head. Carter's legs gave out. He did not try to run. He did not try to fight or argue his way out using his family name. He simply dropped to his knees in the gravel, dropping his car keys, the metal clinking sharply against the rocks. The arrogant, wealthy broker who had stormed into my home demanding my submission was now kneeling in the dirt, weeping like a frightened child. Back in the yard, the sudden arrival of the police cruisers had completely silenced the mob. The aunts and uncles backed away from Nia and Estelle, their anger instantly replaced by the primal fear of armed law enforcement. Nia stood alone in the center of the ruined barbecue, her chest heaving, looking at the police officers marching toward the yard. She turned to look at me, her eyes wide with a terrifying realization. The public humiliation, the loss of the house, and the destruction of her marriage were not the final punishments. They were just the opening acts. The real consequence was walking toward her right now, wearing a silver badge and carrying a pair of steel handcuffs. I took a slow, deep breath, filling my lungs with the fresh morning air. The heavy, suffocating weight that had rested on my chest for 6 long years was completely gone. I had not just cleared my name. I had completely eradicated the toxic foundation that had held me down. I watched the officers approach, ready to make their arrests. The trap had closed perfectly. There was absolutely no escape for either of them. The police officers pulled Carter completely off the gravel, hauling his limp, defeated body toward the back of the flashing cruiser. The heavy metal doors slammed shut, echoing through the silent yard with absolute finality. As the reality of Carter's arrest settled over the crowd, the remaining panic shifted back to the most immediate existential threat, the loss of the family home. Estelle was still kneeling in the ruined grass. She watched the police car for a moment, and then she slowly turned her head to look at me. Her eyes were completely bloodshot and wild with desperation. The arrogant matriarch who had orchestrated my public humiliation was totally broken. She pushed herself forward, actually crawling across the damp dirt on her hands and knees. It was a pathetic sight, but I felt absolutely nothing. She reached my feet and lunged forward, grabbing the hem of my tailored silk trousers with her shaking, dirt-stained hands. "Maya, please," she sobbed, her tears soaking into the expensive fabric. "You have money. You are the chief executive officer of a massive company. You can fix this. You can buy the house back from whoever took it. Save us, Maya. Save our home. I will do anything. I will banish Nia from the family. I will disown her right now. Just please use your wealth to save us." She was offering to throw her golden child away in a heartbeat just to save her own skin and secure a roof over her head. It was the ultimate proof that her love was entirely conditional based on what you could provide for her. I did not reach down to help her up. I simply took one deliberate step backward, forcing her hands to slip off my clothes. She fell forward slightly, catching herself on the grass. I looked down at her, my eyes as cold as solid ice. "You do not get it, do you, Mom?" I asked, my voice quiet, but carrying the heavy, crushing weight of absolute finality. "You are still looking for a savior. You still think there is a mysterious, faceless corporation out there that I can just easily bribe to make this all go away." Estelle looked up at me, her chin trembling violently. "What do you mean?" she whispered. I let a slow, chilling smile touch the corners of my mouth. "The private equity firm that bought out Carter's failing brokerage and ordered his immediate foreclosure," I said, listing the facts with surgical precision. "The aggressive collection agency that quietly purchased Nia's old $50,000 debt last year. And the commercial bank that is sending the sheriff to legally seize this exact property tomorrow morning. I own all of them." Estelle stopped breathing. The last remaining drop of color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a hollow, terrified shell. "I am not just the chief executive officer, Estelle," I whispered, looking down at the woman kneeling in the dirt. "I am the sole owner. I am the board of directors. I am the bank. I am the one taking your house." If a camera were capturing this scene, the lens would slowly begin to lift off the ground in a smooth cinematic crane shot. It would pull continuously upward, pulling higher and higher into the trees, framing me as a towering, untouchable figure of absolute power, standing tall in the center of the yard. As the camera climbed, the family surrounding me would visually shrink into small, insignificant shapes, cowering in the ruined grass, completely dwarfed by the massive financial empire they had forced me to build. I reached into the sleek leather bag resting against my side. The smooth metallic click of the clasp opening sounded like the cocking of a loaded gun in the dead silent yard. Estelle remained on the ground, her tear-soaked face tracking my every movement, with the desperate focus of a condemned prisoner waiting for a pardon. But I did not have a pardon to give her. I only had the executioner's blade. I pulled out two crisp white documents and held them up so the morning sun caught the stark black ink on the pages. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The absolute stillness of the crowd ensured that every single syllable I spoke would land with devastating precision. Paper number 1, I said, dropping the first document onto the grass right in front of her knees. This is the official eviction notice. It is completely legally binding and already processed by the county courts. It authorizes the sheriff to physically remove you from the premises at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. If I let this proceed, you will be escorted out of Big Mama's house with nothing but the clothes on your back. You will have no assets, no credit, and nowhere to go. Estelle stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. Her chest heaved with panicked, ragged breaths. Then I dropped the second document right next to it. Paper number 2. I continued, my tone devoid of any human warmth. This is a federal fraud complaint against Carter and Nia. It details their conspiracy to commit wire fraud, bank fraud, and identity theft by forging your signature on the commercial loan documents. Because it crossed state lines and involved federal banking institutions, the mandatory minimum sentence for this level of financial crime is 10 years in a federal penitentiary. Nia let out a muffled whimper from the other side of the yard, but she did not dare approach me. She was terrified of the police officers still standing near the patrol cars, and she was completely terrified of me. I stepped closer to my mother, my shadow completely enveloping her small, trembling frame. I have the power to stop the eviction, I said softly. I can transfer the deed back into your name free and clear by the end of the business day. But I will only do it under one non-negotiable condition. Estelle looked up, her eyes wide with a frantic, sickening hope. What is it? She rasped. Tell me what to do, Maya. You have a choice, Mom, I said, delivering the final brutal ultimatum. You can take the witness stand in federal court. You can testify under oath against your precious daughter and your beloved white son-in-law. You will look the judge in the eye and send them to prison for 10 years, and I will let you keep the house. Estelle's jaw dropped. She looked over at Nia, who was shaking her head violently, sobbing, and begging her mother silently. Or, I continued, my voice slicing through the thick, humid air. You can protect them. You can refuse to testify, maintain your loyalty to your golden child, and pack your bags for the homeless shelter tomorrow morning. I looked down at the two pieces of paper resting in the dirt. Then I looked back into the terrified eyes of the woman who had thrown me away 6 years ago. Choose. Estelle did not even need a full second to deliberate. The instinct for pure self-preservation completely overrode 34 years of maternal favoritism. She looked at the police officers who were now marching across the damp grass toward the pavilion. She looked back at the eviction notice resting in the dirt. Then she raised her shaking, dirt-stained hand and pointed her finger directly at her golden child. She did it! Estelle screamed, her voice cracking with desperate hysteria. Take her! She forged the documents. She stole the deed. I will testify to whatever you need. Just give me my house back. Nia let out a blood-curdling shriek of absolute disbelief. Her own mother, the woman who had worshipped the ground she walked on her entire life, had just sold her out to federal law enforcement without a single moment of hesitation. Mom, how could you? Nia sobbed, collapsing completely as two officers grabbed her by the arms, hauling her to her feet. They recited her Miranda rights, their stern voices cutting through her frantic wailing. The cold steel handcuffs clicked sharply around her wrists, locking her fate in place. The toxic family had completely devoured itself. They had turned on each other the second their unearned privilege was stripped away, proving that their loyalty was entirely transactional. I watched as Nia was marched across the yard, her ruined designer dress dragging through the mud and loaded into the back of a police cruiser, right next to her completely broken husband. I did not stay to watch the patrol cars drive away. I did not look back at my mother, who was still kneeling in the dirt, weeping over the fragmented pieces of her shattered life. I turned around and walked smoothly across the gravel lot, my posture perfect and my expression entirely serene. Sterling was already waiting by my black SUV, holding the heavy armored door open for me. Before I stepped inside, I took my smartphone out of my pocket. I opened my contacts list and pulled up my sister's name. I tapped delete and permanently blocked the number. Then I did the exact same thing for Estelle. I severed the final dead branches from my family tree. I climbed into the plush leather back seat, and Sterling shut the door with a solid, heavy thud. The thick glass instantly silenced the sirens, the crying, and the chaos of the churchyard. The engine purred to life with a low, powerful hum. From the vehicle's small refrigerated console, I poured myself a chilled glass of vintage champagne. They say you cannot choose the family you are born into. My voice echoed in the quiet luxury of the cabin. But you sure as hell have the right to evict them from the empire you built. I took a slow, luxurious sip of the champagne, letting the crisp bubbles wash away the last remaining traces of my past. As the SUV accelerated out of the lot and merged onto the highway, leaving them all behind in the dust, I looked directly into the camera. A cold, victorious smirk spread across my face. Cut to black.